I have a confession to make to all of you. I love the show Cops. It is a great show in the sense that it's a lot of fun to watch people doing terribly stupid things. Also, it's taught me a very valuable lesson. If you ever want to make a police officer very, very mad at you, make them run. Apparently, they really don't like running because they're always very upset with anyone who makes them run. And it never ends well for them, ever. So there's lesson number one. And though I've also heard that there is one thing that police officers hate more than running, and that would be paperwork. Of course, on Cops, it never actually shows them doing paperwork, but, paperwork's less fun to watch than people running from police officers, apparently. Now, if you've managed to live without television for the past 30 years or so, Cops was probably the first reality show. It followed around police officers in various places, and it watches them doing police officer-y things. But there's one episode of Cops that always sticks out in my mind. Not because it's something funny, not because somebody was more terribly stupid than usual, but it's something that a father does for his son. So the scene starts with a rather typical traffic stop. The reason why they're pulled over really isn't important. It was probably either a taillight out or, it was one of those stops that they were stopping the car because they needed to stop the car and they came up with an excuse. It happens. And as the officer is talking to the people in the car, I can't remember exactly how it goes. He either smells marijuana or sees something in the car. Now, another thing I've learned from Cops is if a police officer has you at a traffic stop, or even if they're at your house, really, if they can look and see something in plain view that is illegal, then they are justified in arresting you or even doing a deeper search because something is out and obvious to be seen. Another reason is something called probable cause, where, for example, if an officer smells marijuana, he has probable cause to search a vehicle for marijuana. It's just kind of how the laws are written. Because, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a cow. So one or both of these things happen in this scene, and the officer, who is at this point called for backup because he's a smart officer, they start searching the car. And they find all kinds of drugs and other drug-related items, all of which are rather obviously illegal. Now, the two men turn out to be a father and a son, and they're getting interviewed separately by an officer, which is always a good idea because if they're interviewed together, they'll make their stories line up. So the son consistently denies that he's done anything wrong, even though the officers are rather convinced that the stuff that they found is his. And one of the reasons they're convinced of this is the son has numerous prior convictions for drug-related offenses. On the other hand, the father is equally adamant that everything in the car belongs to him. Now, the officers don't believe him because the father's record is completely clean, and the son has all these prior convictions for drug-related offenses. But without any actual evidence linking anything to the son, the officers are stuck arresting the father. Even though the officers knew that they didn't do anything wrong, the father knew he didn't do anything wrong, the son knew the father didn't do anything wrong. As best the officers could figure, the father loved his son enough to take the blame so that his son didn't have to go back to jail. Of course, the officers thought this was the dumbest thing in the world. But the father had pretty much confessed and they did what they had to do. And when you look at this situation, it's really kind of silly. Why would this father do this for his son? The reason why this episode of Cops continues to stick with me is it's not unlike what God did for us. Our reading from 1 Corinthians says, "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God." When you start talking about what happened on the cross, what happened at Good Friday, it doesn't make sense. Why would God send his son to pay our penalty for our sin? Even though we fully deserve the punishment for sin. And if we didn't think we deserved it, reading the 10 Commandments definitely makes us think we deserve it, because the 10 Commandments are more than just reminders of good ideas of how to live. They also remind us of our sinfulness. Especially when you look at how Jesus took them to the next level in the Sermon on the Mount by saying, "Oh, you think that it's bad if you murder someone? Well, if you're angry at someone, you're just as good as killed them." Now, we Lutherans have it even worse, because Martin Luther, in the explanation of that commandment, says, well, if you come across someone in need and you don't help them, you've also broken that commandment. So, can tell you how many times I break that commandment on freeway off-ramps. So the 10 Commandments, they remind us that we are sinful people. And yet here we are. We're in the season of Lent, remembering all of the sin that we have in our lives. But we can't forget that God forgives our sin through Jesus' death on the cross. The love that God had for us was enough that he was willing to take on our sin and bear our punishment on himself. Our human brains tell us that that's not how it's supposed to work. If you do something bad, you get punished for it. That's how it's supposed to work. We've all been taught this from before we can remember. If you do something bad, you get punished. If I do something bad, I get punished. You don't get punished if I do something bad. And yet, God was punished for our sin. God was punished for what we did wrong. And then when we confess our sin to God, he forgives us because in Christ, our punishment is gone. He already took care of it. That's why this scene of the Father and the Son in Cobb's resonated with me so much. It's this small human example of what God does for us. Because of our sin, we deserve whatever punishment God has in store for us. We do. There's no questioning that. And yet, the only person who ever didn't deserve to be punished for sin was punished for me. It's crazy. And yet it's also the reason why on Good Friday, whenever we sing that one hymn that always gets me, with the line, "I crucified thee." It's why it hurts so much. Because he died for us. So that sin no longer had any control over our lives. Is this foolishness? I don't care. Because even if it is, it's a foolishness in which I rejoice.